Retro Future.
Good day, everyone. It has been a while since people asked me to do videos on Atom, Diesel, and pretty much every other punk. But for those that have watched my channel, no, I have very little to say on these topics. I don't identify with these labels, and my observation of what these labels are do not coincide with how people feel about them. Watch my discussion with Eric Fisk on this topic for an example. As for the stuff we do agree on, well, you might as well watch my Steampunk Beginner's Guide video series, because those pretty much apply to those genres to a T. Another reason why I didn't make separate videos on them yet. So I decided to talk about something that I believe are very important influences to Diesel and Atom Punk, and that is American architecture and popular design. This also reveals my bias towards the labels, because these are very American-centric genres to me. Therefore, I don't expect there to be a very large, if any, Dieselpunk subculture to arise in Europe. Now, before we get on with the main subject of this video, I am no expert on the subject of architecture. Also, what I'm talking about is a personal selection to what I believe is relevant to retrofuturism. So don't expect a peer-reviewed essay or anything, more of a layman's introduction. So with those disclaimers out of the way, here's a short overview of American architecture from the period of 1920s onward. I will not be discussing Art Deco yet, although it has its peak in the 1920s. We travel back to the interbellum period. While Europe rebuilt in the aftermath of the Great War, the United States experienced an economic boom. Often referred to as the gay or roaring 20s, the States flourished, and this was reflected in its architecture. We see the modern Art Deco, but also the classic Baroque and Louis XIV style. All were elaborate, attention-grabbing styles, but where Baroque was flamboyant and aristocratic, Art Deco was the cool kid that fit the industrial era. Rich in color but streamlined in form, creating complex structures out of basic forms. This in particular inspired the world of Rapture in the BioShock series. But then the 30s came about, and we entered the period of the so-called Great Depression, which hit much of the Western world. Gone was the prosperity of the 20s, and companies toned down the style of their new offices that matched the emerging zeitgeist. This is when a style called Streamline Modern came about, an architectural style developed for the more austere 1930s. Economic decline happened throughout the Western world, and companies were less interested in the ornate Art Nouveau and Art Deco. Streamline, or Art Modern, was a combination of late Art Deco with German design philosophies like that of the Werkbund and Bauhaus, that combined aesthetics with functionality. But we'll focus on the United States in this video. Just like the Art Deco, Art Modern used basic shapes in its design, but it was focused on practicality and reproducibility. Effectively, they stripped Art Deco of all its ornamentation in favor for a more efficient, scientific aesthetic, aka streamlining. Where Art Nouveau was warm and unique, Streamline was objective and uniform. It may have inspired many minimalistic products we own today, like mobile phones. Buildings were made to look streamlined with straight horizontal patterns and rounded corners. The overall shapes were basic, roofs became flat and windows became plentiful but relatively narrow. Fun fact, by the way, streamlined buildings are sometimes laid out to look like boats. My old high school is shaped like that. Then World War II started. It's kinda treated like a new paradigm. 1939 is treated like it's some important cutoff date in the architectural timeline. But then again, we are talking about a world war. Nevertheless, there were important innovations made in the war period that became very important during the aftermath. One major innovation was prefabrication, or prefab, that allowed construction of buildings to be done at a fabrication yard before getting shipped to its final construction site. Especially in Europe, entire cities needed to be rebuilt in this way. But because it's cost effective, it kind of became a new norm in construction, especially in the wake of the baby boom. Also, during the emergence of the Nazi regime in Germany, a lot of German architects that were members of the aforementioned Bauhaus school moved to the States, increasing its influence overseas. This included Walter Gropius, the founder of the so-called Bauhaus, who moved to the US before the war. So we see a lot of German influences during the 50s when block buildings with rectangular windows became commonplace. The Germans may have lost the war, they started to dominate the American landscape. From the 30s on, there's an increased focus on utilitarian design that was a combination of new design philosophies and economic stagnation. Despite this cultural shift, something uniquely American arose during the 50s, thanks to good old capitalism. In 1949, architect John Lautner was asked to design a coffee shop for a company in West Hollywood called Googie's. Lautner believed the design of the coffee shop needed to match the logo of the franchise, so he created something quite out there for the time. This design, that contrasted with the objective German architecture, was further developed by Victor Newlove, who described the style as whimsical, as the Googie font was inspired by 1920s cartoons. Now something interesting happens after that. Originally, the Googie style signs were meant to draw people to these establishments, especially people who were driving cars, which were now commonplace. These signs needed to be seen and read from afar. That's why these signs were constructed into the height with neon letters that could be seen during the night. These were to challenge people, as it were, to stop and just have a look what all the promotion was about. That's why these buildings were designed with large windows, so people could look inside and see how the colors matched the furnitures, plates, utensils and even the uniforms. It wasn't just the architecture, it was a total package. This extended to the food preparation itself, because fast food joints had an image problem during this period. Especially places that were serving ground beef products like hamburgers. The general audience was told they threw in things like ears and noses into the ground beef and other unwanted body parts.
Oh no, not again.
So these Googie-style restaurants opened up the kitchens and prepared the meat behind the counter so customers could see what ended up in their burgers. That change in marketing and architecture just happened to occur at the beginning of the space race between the United States and Soviet Russia. After the Russians launched Sputnik in 1957 and the start of the Apollo program in 1961, space and science fiction became this huge thing. It created a whole new vision of the future, and of course marketers jumped right on that. They combined the hype with the already popular and effective Googie architecture that was already designed around spectacle and transformed venues into attractions of their own right. Buildings were made to look like space stations and neon-lit flying saucers. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any references of waiters dressed as aliens or astronauts. Regardless, you were not just getting a cup of coffee, you were buying an idea. Speaking of dreams, this era is all about the nuclear family and American dream. Houses were not just made for living anymore. These deserve to be mansions in their own right, where even the biggest celebrity would feel at home. For an example of this, all you need to do is watch this old commercial called Designed for Dreaming by General Motors to get a sense of the optimism for the era. It's a live performance that spared no expense in selling its audience not just a range of products, but a vision. It sells you an image of the future that is so naive, so optimistic it is now unthinkable to us. This in turn inspired Populux, a style primarily applied to consumer products, ranging from cars to fridges. Populux products were designed to make the average American feel like he or she was living the same luxury as their Hollywood counterparts. Gold, shiny and chrome with pearly white finish was used to offset deep contrasting colors to make everything look fast and luxurious. Cars were streamlined and complemented with fin-like features. Household products were made to resemble art pieces in their own right, with some inspiration from Bauhaus here and there. But above all, it was like that late Googie architecture. It was all about delivering to you tomorrow's future today. Cars received names like Golden Rocket and Firebird, and the marketers made sure that people would associate this image with the idea of the American dream and the bright future that could await them if they brought their product, of course. All of that faded away, however, during the 70s for, well, lots of reasons. One of them being globalism. Apart from the economic crisis that ran many of these venues out of business, foreign competition hit the American car industry hard. Electronics became smaller, leaving little room for elaborate design, and people wanted their stuff cheap, and still do. Also, the culture changed in the wake of the Vietnam War and the rise of the hippies. Googie and Populux' association with the American dream became a mark for political activists and social critics more than anything else. It just didn't fit the zeitgeist anymore. Also, the Gernsbackian vision of science fiction was replaced by the more political and scientifically minded visions of the future. The optimistic futurism of the 50s just became outdated, and the idea of the American dream became a target of ridicule. It's kind of interesting. We see a kind of revival of the gay 20s in the early 2000s. We see this type of architecture revival in video games. The old swing and rock and roll sounds are making a comeback in mainstream music with neo-swing and psychobilly. Regardless of what it means for our society, we see a renewed interest for the sounds and aesthetics of the era, be it a rather rose-colored and selective vision of the era. That doesn't make it bad by any means, but we do have to be careful not to have this wallpaper over the discrimination and other problems of the time that these styles tended to do back then. I'm not saying that is what these styles are intended to do, just that it is the view of the past that now dominates pop culture. And with that being said, I'm looking forward to what mainstream interest in retrofuturism will lead to. And that is all I have to say on this subject for now. Please let me know in the comments if you agree that there is a renewed interest in the aesthetics and sounds of this particular period. I hope you enjoyed this video, and from now on I'm going to post the scripts on my website radioretrofuture.com. This took a while to research and produce, so if you want to support my efforts, I do have a subscribe star where you can support my videos and future projects, for which I am considering to commission artists and require other services that also cost money. So if you want to support us financially, you can do so for the price of a cup of coffee a month. I also am working on merchandise for the channel, so I am open to ideas for potential products. But of course, you can always support this channel by sharing these videos on your social media. It really makes all the difference. And thanks to all the people who brought this channel to people's attention. And of course, make it your way.